Welcome back to this class. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about news item. Luckily, we have discussed a little bit about this type of text in the previous meeting, and today we're going to dig deeper about the text of news item. Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about three things. Number one, we're going to talk about the social functions of the news item itself. And then number two, we're going to talk about the gender structures of the news item. And last one, we're going to talk about the language feature of the news item. Right, so what is news item text? News item text is basically the text that we see every day in the newspaper. Right, it's a news that has been broadcasted in the television, for example, and that is what we call news item. Basically, a news item is the text that informs the reader about the event of the day that is newsworthy. What is newsworthy mean? Newsworthy mean is this that information is the word broadcasting. For example, if there is an accident, for example, and people want to know about it, it means that newsworthy. But if it is something that is unimportant for people to know, then this is not newsworthy. So what is newsworthy mean? Newsworthy mean is a word broadcasting. If a certain information, for example, if you talk about the coronavirus right now, then a lot of people will want to know about it. Means that it is newsworthy to be broadcasted because there are a lot of people want to be the target market of our news item, for example. And people want to know more about coronavirus. That's why coronavirus is newsworthy. But how about for example, the life of Sir Mulyadi, for example, right? So people do not want to know about the life of Sir Mulyadi because they barely know who Sir Mulyadi is, for example, right? So that is why we call this news is not newsworthy because people do not want to know about it even more because the life of Sir Mulyadi is not that important compared to Raffi Ahmad and Nagita Slavina, for example, right? So Nagita Slavina and Raffi Ahmad life is newsworthy because it has been consumed publicly by the netizen, for example, right? So that's what is newsworthy. So the news item text is basically talk about the text. Is basically talk about the information that is newsworthy, right? So the example of it you can find in the newspaper or website or TV channel. All right. So let's talk about the gender structure. If you want to read or to create a certain news item, how do you create it? There are three gender structure that you need to know here. Number one is the main event. Number two, we call it elaboration, and then number three is source. So let's talk one by one. What is the main event? So basically, if you want to write about news item, in the first paragraph, you need to elaborate about the main event. You need to concisely say what is the event that you want to share to the public, for example. If you want to share about coronavirus, for example, the coronavirus vaccine has been found, for example, this is a breaking news, for example, and you need to put that kind of sentence in the first paragraph. Because that is the main event. Main event is the most important part of the news item itself, right? So how about elaboration? The second general structure in elaboration. So elaborations will elaborate further about the main event. For example, in the main event we talk about, for example, the coronavirus vaccine has been found, then we need to elaborate further about how, who, for example, what, when, and where the coronavirus vaccine has been found. So those elaborations become the second gender structure. Lastly, if it source. Source is very important in order to validate your news item. Without source, your news item will likely to be more like an essay. So news item is not like that. We want to convince people that this information is valid, right? So that is why we use source. What is source mean? Source is the people or credible data who actually support the main event. For example, if we want to write, for example, that the coronavirus vaccine has been found, means that there need a credible people inside of that. It can be the researcher, it can be the scientist, it can be like doctor, for example, or government who try to explain, or who actually stated that the coronavirus vaccine has been found. So information that we write is taken from that individual, for example. So that is the source. So this is very important, because without it, that our news item will not be credible as we want, for example, right? So that is the general structure. So we have first main event, number two we have elaboration, last one we have source. And then how about the language feature? Language feature is basically about how the writing is actually formed, like what you need to do in order to write your news item, for example, right? Instead of the structure, you also need to pay attention to the language feature. What kind of language that you use, what kind of language style that you want to employ in your news item text, for example. And then, okay, so the most important language feature in news item is what we call direct or indirect speech, right? Luckily, we also have discussed this type of material in the second grade of senior high school, and I think that many of you still remember this kind of stuff. Just in case if you forgot a little bit about this direct or indirect speech, I will explain a little bit about it. So basically, direct or indirect speech is actually word in a source. How? For example, direct speech is what we call kalimat langsung. In order to actually state this direct speech, we need to use quotation mark, for example. If, for example, the government says, in quotation mark, we have found the vaccine for coronavirus, for example, then the writer of the news item text also need to use the exact word or the exact sentence that the government used in their writing. They need to put in the quotation mark, we have found the coronavirus vaccine, for example, quotation mark. So that is a direct speech. But how about indirect speech? Indirect speech basically is just extending the message without paying attention to the original source of the word, right? The word can be different, the way how you elaborate can be different, as long as the message is still the same. For example, the government says, in quotation mark, we have found coronavirus vaccine. And then you as the writer want to write about it using indirect speech, but and you want to write it in indirect speech in this way. For example, the government said that they have found. The word of we transformed to they, because it is an indirect kalimat tidak langsung, right? So there are a lot of changes that you need to pay attention in order to create an indirect speech. It's like a time changes, or the and like tenses changes, and also about the subject changes and the object changes also. You guys need to pay attention to that. And then in order to freshen your mind about direct or indirect speech, you can go back to our previous class in the second grade, and if you still have any question about it, you can contact me further. Okay, I think that is all for today, everyone. If you still have any question, you can put in the comment sections, or if you want to have a better approach, you can contact me in my personal WhatsApp account. And don't forget to do the exercise. See you and have a good day.